Hi, it's Dirk de Klein here for Leer Media TV and History of Swords. I'll be talking to Miriam Friedmann today. Miriam is the daughter of renowned artist David Friedman. Welcome, Miriam. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you. And thank you for your interest in my father's story.
Well, thanks for coming on as well, because as I told you before, it is an amazing story, and it's something that needs to be told, and something people have to hear it as well, because his paintings they speak volumes. Now I'm not going to talk too much here because it's going to be your story. I'm just interested in a few things. First of all, who was his inspiration as an artist? Did he have any favorite piece himself, even for his own piece or somebody else's piece? I mean, I'm talking as Dutchman. I mean, of course, the Dutch are known for their great masters like Rembrandt and those people.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, when it comes to art, I'm more or less clueless. I mean, I'm all into music, but paintings, I love seeing them, but I'm not up on my artists. I know the Dutch ones, but that's it. But would your father have had a
No, I'm proud to tell you that I did a college thesis on my father where I compared him to other artists of his time, and that was one of my questions. So I have a translated quote for you.
Good.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, this was written to me in 1973 by my father. Artists who influenced me most were Max Liebermann, Lovis Corinth, and Max Lavote. They all had the taste I like and the technique from Franz Hall, from whom they learned as well. I did not like everything I saw of Liebermann or Corinth. My interest was in the subject matter and the techniques they used. And also there was another excerpt in his autobiography that he became interested in art when his teacher showed him in the second grade illustrations of Rubens and Rembrandt.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that, you know, my father loved the art museum, and we would go quite often to the St. Louis Art Museum in Missouri to look at these masters.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen Rembrandt's a few times. I've seen the Night Watch, which is a massive painting, and it's impressive. So, but I can see some paintings behind you there. I assume they're all your father's?
Yes, yes, they are. I specifically put up, I usually don't have this painting hanging, of the night raid in the Lodz Ghetto. You could see the people fleeing away, and you can see the iconic bridge of the Lodz Ghetto in the background.
Yeah.
You can also see all the way to the left my father. It's a figure of my father. Whether he is really in it or he put himself in it as a model, I didn't know, because I didn't know at the time, a young child and as an even early adult, to think of such a question to ask him. Because right next to him is a woman holding a young child. So in my imagination, my father painted himself into this painting, but never depicted it. He didn't label it, saying,
Okay.
This is me, this is my family. But,
yeah. And I mean, and that's why I asked you to come along as well, because of him surviving Auschwitz, but also being I'm not going to call him a victim, because he's survived, but he was a victim. He was a victim of a brutal regime, a regime that actually kind of before World War II, before even World War I, he painted for the Austro-Hungarian government at the time as well. And when you compare then what happened then only about 20 years later, where he had to leave, even though he had lived in Berlin for a while as well, a city that benefited of his art, and then he had to leave, escape this tyranny. So yeah, and that's what I'm kind of interested in. And how did he cope with that? How were his initial thoughts on that, and how did he deal with it?
If you want to look back at all that he went through, his life was quite tumultuous. He had, you know, to become an artist, you need the piece to develop, And he had World War I was an interruption. Then when the Nazis came to power, he stayed in Berlin. He was banned from his profession, so he had to remove his art from the galleries, and he turned to his craft. He knew how to make posters, and he learned how to renovate. He renovated buildings, did a different type of art, He started a business, and he was able to do that because he was still a Czech citizen. He automatically became a Czech citizen in 1918 after World War I.
Yeah.
So, so instead of being Austrian, he became Czech.
Czech, yeah.
So being a foreigner in Germany, he was still able to have this business until 1938, when that possibility for any Jew
was taken away.
Impossible. And that's when he began to plan to flee with his wife and infant daughter, who was born in September of that year. So it was, she was an infant. It was a terrible time. And then after he survived, he had to, as he wrote me a little diary, and as he explained it to me, how could you forget your wife and your child? It was a crippling grief, but you had, in order to live, you had to work, you had to move on, and that's what he did. And he started, because I think of his extreme talent and resourcefulness, he was able to start again. And had the communists not, become taken over, I think he would have been happy living in Prague after the war. But it became impossible. And his paintings that he wanted, which is this painting on the wall, came to the attention of the officials who were had the War Museum, and they wanted his artwork for the War Museum, and he told them no. So they put the paintings on put him on an exhibition, what do you call that? A prohibition that his artwork could not leave the country. But they didn't know David Friedman. He was very resourceful. He got it. He bribed an official. He stamped it. Okay, and then he sent it along with his father-in-law to Israel. So they were never connected.
Yeah.
And when he fled with my mother, they were stopped. He was asked, "Where are the paintings?" "Oh, I left them in Prague," and they let him go because they couldn't find the paintings in his luggage. Because they already were there in Israel. He had saved he didn't want to leave his work with the communists. So anyway, this is just how, important this work was for him. He wanted to show to the world the experiences that he witnessed, and to prevent such a Holocaust again, because he felt that nobody would believe that this ever happened. And we have that problem today.
I see, and that's why it's so important that stories like these are brought out in open and do get told. Yes, and we have a big problem with that today. I notice myself as well with my articles. Often people just deny it, or they say, "Well, we had nothing to do with it," or what they try to lessen it a small bit. Either options are not good for me, because it has to be told as it was. Now, what I find striking was, you mentioned it, he left you a diary, and this is like a red line through a lot of people I've spoken to who are children of survivors. Love their parents would not say anything about the Holocaust, or say little about the Holocaust, because they didn't want to, I don't know, maybe they didn't want to revive it, but that's the way they coped, and they just kept going. They had to survive, you have to keep going.
Well, my father locked his feelings like in a jail. He didn't talk about the Holocaust. But when he started his second series artwork, which was in 1962 after he retired from commercial art, because that's how he survived here in the United States. He opened the door and let all that come out, but I didn't have to talk to him about it because I could see it in his artwork.
Yeah.
It was right off the living room. And of course, I was fascinated watching him sketch. And he put himself in some of the artwork to show that he was not just a witness, but also a victim.
Yeah.
And he would hold a mirror in his hand and he would look at the mirror and then he would sketch. He would, use himself as a model. He used my mother as a model. And even in one of the drawings, there was a very big similarity, I thought, of one of the young girls that looked like me, or at least, in my imagination, that he put me in there as a model. But because, he's a true artist, he doesn't copy, he draws from life. That's how he was trained.
Yeah, I mean, that's so fascinating about it as well. But I want to share one painting, and I believe he's in it himself as well, if you don't mind, because it's... And
then I want to come back to your question again.
Yeah.
You had a very interesting question, and I have a direct quote for your answer.
Sure.
And that question was how he was affected by all his interruptions and losses.
Yeah.
And he wrote in his diary in April 1945, and this is a translation again, it's always much better in the original language, German. He writes, "How many years have been lost? What a personality I might have become if I could have lived from my art in a free country. Always when I was in best form, my development was disturbed, whether by war or because I'm a Jew and lived in Germany." And I think this is very telling because his promising career had been destroyed.
Yeah,
so
and that's...
He couldn't be the next famous, renowned world famous artist. And this reason I am so passionate about his work is I want to rescue him from obscurity, and I think I've done that as much as possible.
But you definitely have. But
because if he didn't have this second family, he would have been one of thousands of artists of a lost generation, which he would fall into.
Yeah, and I often call that the forgotten crime of the Holocaust. There's so many artists, so many scientists could have been, could have flourished. I mean, we're talking before the
generation of more than a generation.
Yeah, several
generations of people who could have made unbelievable contributions.
Exactly.
Now, this is theater actresses, writers, scientists.
But even homemakers and plumbers. This is a lot of people. It's been wiped out for no good reason.
Oh,
and
including his family.
And that's I want to touch on that later again. Now, this is the painting I was referring to. I believe he's in it as well, in the middle, the man with the glasses.
That's him.
Yeah, this painting really captured my imagination because they say a picture paints 1,000 words, and I think that doesn't really apply with photographs, but when it comes to, because a photograph doesn't always tell the whole story. When it comes to a picture like this, it's just amazing that the variety of emotions you see in these people's eyes. You see, really, I think this is called liberation. So this is when they were liberated. So
this is the Russians had liberated them, and I think the description said, "Are we really free? Is this really free?" And like they were not truly believing after all that they went through.
And that comes across.
They had just those people that you would see here, the victims. They had successfully hidden from the Germans because the death march continued.
Yeah.
And they had hidden. My father had hidden with several others away, into the earth. They hid themselves, and they saw that the death march continued.
Yeah.
And then a few days later, the Russians came, and they threw them a piece of, threw them bread, and he said, "You are free." And that was January 25th, 1945. And as you know, that those who were unfortunate and continued on the death march, many of those are not liberated till mid-April and even up to May of 1945. So it was a whole amazing story, because he didn't trust the Germans. And when they, and it's a very big story in Blechhammer, it's very well known. They were trying to get everyone out of the barracks and into the death march, and they were throwing, they were throwing bread outside, and then when they came out, they would shoot them or throw them into the line, So those who didn't come out, they went into the barracks and shot up the entire barracks. And my father had a can over his head, and he was hiding, and he didn't get shot, but he saw, his comrades getting shot. He wrote all this down. And then that last one is the last of that particular black and white series that he started at the end of '63, and it went on exhibition in St. Louis. Probably in the United States, it could have been the very first exhibition of its kind, just like in the Czechoslovakia in January '46. I believe my father's exhibition in Český Dub, which was like an hour northwest of Prague, was also one of the first, if not the first, exhibition of its kind.
Yeah, but and with that was that painting there. It has all these emotions. It has disbelief. It has there's a bit of confusion, but there's relief as well, and all come across at the same point. And I think that's fascinating. Now you mentioned him.
He was masterful in portraits. The use of light and dark, the expressions of the people, even the hands. His hands, they were real hands.
Yeah.
It's not. If you look at portraits, many of them, you wouldn't know who they were.
Yeah.
My father's portraits,
there's no doubt. You know who they are. Yeah.
You know who they were.
Yeah. No, but you were mentioning his first family, and I believe his first daughter was called Miriam Helena, but they were killed.
Yes.
They were murdered during the Holocaust.
So I knew as a young child that I was named after her, but it was too of an overwhelming concept to really absorb as a young child.
Yeah.
So I can't say that it was a burden to me, because I was a happy kid. I mean, my parents were we were a very close family. My mother was very loving. My father was very loving. And we just really got along quite well. I mean, I didn't have a lot of the trauma that many of the second generation is speaking about today. I'm not, of course, it was very sad that I didn't have relatives. I didn't have any brothers or sisters either. And my one grandfather that survived Auschwitz was living in Israel with his family, his second family as well. So he didn't have that. But that was my childhood. I didn't really know anything different. And my parents were very, I played the piano, played the violin. I went to dancing school. I did all the things that
all the fun
doing.
stuff.
I was outside playing with the kids on the street. In those days, it was, you'd never really, today your kids are not running around on the streets unless you're right there with them, right?
Yeah.
But in those days, the kids ran all over the neighborhood. That I knew even as a young child not to go too far, because I did not want to worry my parents. So I already knew that my parents were special. And they had many friends. Most of them were survivors.
Yeah.
So this was our family too, because we would go to their house, and, so it was very, I have fond memories of my childhood.
And that's good. But I have to say, it's amazing to hear that in a way that not that you had a fabulous childhood, but
I'm saying it as a counteractive to all that's going on, because every time I get a lot of invitations to all these trauma meetings, and I say I don't want to listen to this anymore, because if you start to worry that was I traumatized by this or that, I feel happy, so why should I listen to this? My trauma is going to be different. I have my father's artwork.
Yeah.
That's my responsibility. I don't want to say it's a trauma, but it is a responsibility.
Yeah.
And only I can manage that. And I mean, I would love to have a whole team to help me, but I don't. What
join
exactly?
the club.
Yeah. So in other words, it's not just his Holocaust artwork. It's the artwork that I'm finding from before this war, and then the artwork that he did post-war. They all have a theme. You know, his life after the liberation, his works in Czechoslovakia, then his works in Israel, then what he made in the United States. Everything and everywhere he went, he left a legacy.
Yeah.
Even in commercial art, he left a legacy. Painting the Budweiser Clydesdales and happy folks selling beer from a 2-story building instead of painting the Holocaust, which was really what he wanted to do in the country. And then you have to think, he was 61 years of age, and he got this amazing job as a head painter of the St. Louis branch of General Outdoor Advertising. They didn't care about his age. They didn't care that he didn't speak English. They only cared that he could paint those portraits faster than anyone they'd ever seen.
And I saw the portrait he painted, the first one he did in Illinois, was in Chicago. It's absolutely fantastic. It's just so.
On Strange Inheritance? You saw that?
And it's just so lifelike. So I mean, it's.
And you know what was the most amazing thing about my father is he created these albums. So from what I learned, nobody did this like my father. He created an album of those photographs of his billboards, like 150 of them that he did or more. And he saved the correspondence, and I took all of that and I donated it to Washington University in St. Louis, the Modern Graphic Library, because they were very interested in it and also wanted to preserve his history. Nobody has this, you know, and it's really something unique. You know, he was an immigrant, and when he came to the United States, he had to fight for that survival. It was that same survival, because if he didn't succeed, he would live in poverty.
Yeah. I mean, that shows you the power of the man. But even I was going to say earlier that he allowed you as well to have that childhood, to go out and play outside. I can only imagine.
I want to add to that, because my father would accompany me, like if I was going ice skating.
Yeah.
Or if I was going, would go to the zoo. We had a very famous St. Louis zoo. It's world famous zoo. We would enjoy going there in Forest Park. He would always carry a sketchbook. And people would come around and watch him sketch. So this is some, childhood memories. And it's great. I mean, I look and I see, he sketches at Lewis Park the day I was ice skating. Am I on that ice when he skated? He never told me who it was, if I was one of those people, but it was just normal for me.
Actually, I saw that ice skating sketch.
Oh,
and
you did?
It looked a bit like a Dutch scene, because the Dutch are known for the ice skating. I thought it was in the Netherlands, but I saw the transcript with it as well.
One of the greatest things about this journey of mine into my father's past was when I was able to find some of his artwork. I recognized something that never really occurred to me, that some of the themes that he painted post-war were the themes he painted as a young man as well.
Yeah.
I was finding fishing scenes and, you know, boat scenes. And I said, my father did that at the St. Louis Forest Park, the fishing scenes and the boat scenes. So he liked to do certain things that he continued all through his life. And he also looked for projects. For example, he did a scene, he did a whole series of the urban landscape of St. Louis, buildings and garbage with the garbage cans and the streets and the alleys. And another project was he went into the library and did he was inspired by candid camera, you know, where people know that they're being filmed. He would go in there and sketch them. He would.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
And he would hide. I was with him. He would accompany me. I love to read, so we were always in the library. So he would hide and he would sketch behind the, you know, under the table or on the side. And that whole series was also donated. Most of that series was donated to Washington University. Also
Okay.
Preserve this artwork that he
his legacy.
Do it. Yeah.
No, Zoom is telling me I only have a few minutes left, so I just there's.
What is that?
Yeah, no, it's. I know it's when it's recording, it kind of compresses the time small, but no, we keep going. There's one thing I am really fascinated about. That he actually, because he was an artist, he also survived because there was. He was told to paint during the, I read a small bit on it that he was painting something and some of the inmates were looking as well, and he felt he was safe.
Yes, this actually happened. So, and if we get disconnected, you could just send me another Zoom meeting.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So how the story timeline goes is he arrived in Auschwitz. It would have been about September 2nd, according to the date of the transport from the Lodz Ghetto at a gas station. And after being there for a week, he knew he wasn't going to survive. That fact that he survived that long was amazing because he was over the age, you know, of 45 and had survived because he still looked good enough that they could work him. And one day at roll call, they were asking for musicians. So he thought to himself, well, they were not asking for artists. Maybe I can get out by being a musician because he was a violinist. Yeah. But he hadn't played the violin in 6 years, and he was never a concert master. He was a very good violinist. He studied violin under Karl Flesch in Berlin. So he was a very fine violinist, but having this life that he had, you know, he was taking a risk, but he stepped forward, and he was actually picked, one of 16 men, and were put on an open air truck in the winter, because it was quite cold, even that in September, that when he was saying, and got to Auschwitz, to the subcamp Gleiwitz I. And when they arrived, they said, go pick your instruments. And after being in the open air truck in the freezing rain, snow that they went through, his hands were frozen, and he failed the audition, and he was beaten and kicked into the barracks. And out come some colleagues, other victims that he knew from Berlin and Prague, and they said, you have to show them you can paint. Otherwise you won't survive here. So he set out, he got brushes, he made actually his own brushes. He went to the kitchen, he got cans, and he somehow made paint. He wrote it how he did all this, but I don't know exactly now how he managed to make the paint. And then he went back to the barracks, and he put a stool on top of a table, and he painted across the barracks wall. And soon the capos were called, and they went and they got the SS Obersturmbannführer of Mo, one of the biggest beasts of the known in the Holocaust. But obviously, Mo had a passion for art and music, and that's why he was at that orchestra in Gleiwitz I. It's crazy, but that they wanted them an orchestra, and now he found himself a painter. And my father writes, he knocked on his shoulder, and he knew he was saved. Now, the painting that he made, he picked a scene that he had painted in Berlin of the Havel River, and he described it with red roofs, birds, and the whole the whole picture about how the lake, the river had its how it appeared in the painting, everything. And about, I think it was around 2012, I get notifications on my phone, on my email, on my Facebook. There was this woman who was trying to get in touch with me. It's just random. And this is the greatest stories when they're random like this. So she had been dusting her paintings, and all of a sudden wondered about this artist, David Friedman. So she went to the internet and she found me. And 5 minutes later, she was emailing me. So she was introducing herself. She was German, living in Italy, German woman, and she had inherited the painting from a Jewish lady who had lived in the house that they called Omar. So she was like very close. She didn't have any children. So her mother had inherited the painting, and now she had it. And so when I got that, I copied the translation of how my father described that painting of the Havel River. And she writes back, "That's my painting." So here was a story that you would think could be made up. Oh, sure, he painted a painting across a barracks wall. Sure, he painted something of the Havel River. And now we have the painting. And that is just priceless.
I mean, it was meant to be that she.
And it happens to me again and again and again. It happened to me numerous times over the 30 to 40 years that I've been doing this, is that the most crazy detail will come out that you couldn't make it up. Stories are just sensational.
I remember I did a piece once on he was an American Jewish soldier, Leo Lichten was his name. Just a random name, because he was buried in the war cemetery where near from and I saw the name, just a random name. I kind of put myself in his shoes and thought about his thoughts, and I did an article and a blog on it, posted it. About a day later, I got an email from his nephew. He said, "Thank you so much for doing this, because for honoring my uncle." And I said, "Well, actually, I didn't know your uncle. It's just a name I picked up, random." And I thought, these things that they touch me, and what your story, it just really touches me, because I think they were meant to be in a way. So
it's almost like my father was the producer.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he pointed the way.
Yeah.
But I had to go on this journey to find it. That's how I look at it. And I some people don't understand that this is so gratifying to me. This is where I get my joy. Putting together the pieces, of an artist that, was thought dead, actually. Nobody thought that anyone at his age was even going to survive. And the researchers, in Lodz and didn't seek him out. They didn't know, and it was just by chance that I stumbled over some discoveries that came out of the Lodz Ghetto. But once it was known, then of course he was recognized. But that's the whole point. Unless you have something to show, you're not recognized.
Yeah, exactly.
You could say I sketched this and I made that, but where is it? If you don't have it, people don't have an understanding. And that's actually true also for myself, because when I was young, and he didn't really talk about it very much, except until he showed me those chess masters, that I realized, how painful this was, that he had nothing to show me. And that really fueled my passion, even at a young age, that maybe I could do something. But what could you do in those days? There was nothing you could do in those days. It was not like now we have the internet. It was, everything has changed so drastically in the last 20 years. And then, the other really amazing thing was I visited Berlin, and I visited his non-Jewish sister-in-law. And I walked into the house and apartments, and I was just astounded that there were paintings of my father on the wall. And I didn't have to ask to know that these are pre-war works, including one of his murdered wife, Matilda.
Yeah.
So I tried not to make a fuss, and I just made photographs, and she's telling me how she saved them during the war and all this, and I'm thinking to myself, no way in the world would my father have left behind his painting of his wife, So when I gave my father the photographs, I could see the emotion in his face, that he felt that his sister-in-law had deceived him.
Yeah.
So anyway, he was able to get at least that painting back. It was a fight. Got that painting back of his wife, Matilda. It was painted in 1938, shortly before they fled to Prague, and she's laying out on the couch. You may have seen the painting in the film. It's really quite special. And when you ask what was his favorite painting, he never said he had a favorite painting, but I think the most meaningful painting is of his wife. And I played a small part in that. All these things stay with you.
Yeah.
So that after my father died, I had a lot of material, but it's all written in German and in tiny little handwriting. So it took another decade or more actually to get it transcribed. Not translated so much. I can read German, but it's always nicer to read it in English. But I can read the German. The problem was that it had to be typed. Okay. And then one day a miracle happened. I met someone, a German historian, who was very interested in my story and my search, and he transcribed it for me. His name was Detlef Lorenz, and we became very, very close. And he started to help me with my other project to rescue my father from obscurity, was his press drawings, because although he lost his whole life's work, I was told his work in the newspaper was destroyed as well. But I found out that a very valuable lesson. You can write 100 letters. The truth is, you just have to go there. You have to go yourself, and then you find the truth. And I discovered there were archives of newspapers right in Berlin, even though I was told Berlin was bombed and the Russians took everything else. So I was like astounded because I was looking, I had nothing to go by. I only had what my father wrote me, and he said that he made a drawing of Lodz Ghetto when he was laid out in state at the Berliner Secession. And he gave me the date. And the archivist said, no, your father, he didn't do that. He says another artist made a portrait of him, but I thought to myself, well, my father never said he did a portrait. But I went to the archives, and it shows me the drawing by the other artist, a portrait of Lodz Ghetto. And as he turns the page, there was my father's drawing. He never bothered. You see, so you can never expect other people to do your research for them, even the head of archives, even when it's something so personal that I'm just trying to find something from my father to show. He wrote me, he did thousands of portraits. Not one survived, not one in any newspaper. So within an hour, I had found 16. And I said, I have to come back to Berlin now. So which is what I did. I went a few times and I sat in the archives. So the newspapers are bound in one huge book, the size of the newspaper, and they're very, very fragile. In fact, today you probably you're not allowed. They're mostly on microfiche, but I was allowed. And I went through it not really knowing what I was looking for. And it was really astonishing how interesting the personalities were that he portrayed. And soon after that, you know, there was still a publication I couldn't find. It was called der Deutsche Rundfunk. It was a radio journal magazine for all German listeners. Yeah. Just like today, like a TV guide, but much more classy, because it had stories and articles in it. A very cultured type of a magazine. And it was, I mean, didn't know what I was looking for. And like with debt left to the archives, they didn't know, nobody knew what it was. I said, if my father wrote der Deutsche Rundfunk, we must find it. So I kept nagging him. And one day he sends me an email that he found it. It was in the basement of this huge library in Berlin. And out jumped 200 very famous personalities, musicians, and you know, Arnold Schoenberg, Simon Goldberg, a lot of the famous people from the 1920s. And he put it all together in a CD and took it over to the, sent it to the historian at the Berlin Philharmonic, because the Berlin Philharmonic was now having made a movie, and they were published a book about their time under the Nazis. Yeah. And he just happened to be looking for, his name is Dr. Helge Grunewald. He was happening to look for an image of the young Simon Goldberg, who was the first, you know, who was the youngest concertmaster for the Berlin Philharmonic. And just as fast as you can say concerto, my father's portrait of Simon Goldberg was in their exhibition.
Sure enough, very good.
And he was so fascinated with these, because the Berlin archives, the Berlin Philharmonic was bombed at the end of the year, as well as, so they lost their archives. So my father's portrait gave face to many unknown musicians that had played there. So he worked on an exhibition, and I think that had to be the most exciting you know, note for me, was to have an exhibition in Berlin being recognized by the Berlin Philharmonic. No. I don't think there's anything greater than that.
Exactly.
Except having Holocaust artwork at the German consulate in New York. It was a very good tie.
Yeah. Actually, as I said, it's coming to an end here. So I think this is a great point where we can finish up with. And I thank you so much for talking to me. I'm sure we'll talk again, because there's so much to know about David Friedman. Right. Friedman. I didn't think it was actually that much. I saw a lot of you sent me a lot of information. I'm still going through it, and it's a fabulous story. And right. But thank you so much, Miriam. And yes, this story will be shared. and it is a good story. I'm surprised no one actually came up with the idea of making a movie about your father. So maybe that's something.
Yes, well, everybody always says that, but no one. I don't have those connections. And the other thing that's very important is that how he survived as an artist. He survived as an artist in World War I. He survived as an artist through the German occupation in Nazi occupation in Berlin.
Yeah.
Because I found also that he was sketching musicians also. That's another story of other musicians that came up in 1936 at the Kultur. Wanted to say that some of his works that came up showed that he wasn't just doing that, he was still working on his art as much as possible. And then his work as a refugee in Prague, with the portraits of the Jewish community in Prague, is very important. And I also been following that story very closely because I've been identifying all those that have no signature or have only one signature. So like a Bergman, there's thousands of Bergmans that I was able to figure out who that was. It was so it wasn't just about my father, it was also the legacy that he left behind. And I wanted also to give face to the victims that he portrayed, make sure that they also have a name.
Yeah, and that's very good. Again, thank you so much. And actually, I will send you a link over the next few days again to continue this. If that's okay with you.
I'll also send you the answers that I wrote to your questions because I didn't cover it all.
Yeah.
The story is quite sensational. Even how he survived in Israel. Because at his age, they say nobody can believe that he, could have been a valuable contributor. They just figure, oh, you're a senior citizen. But as a senior citizen, he just worked like a young man.
That's it. Age is just a number.
That's right. That's right. I follow his lead.
Exactly. Now, I bid you farewell.
Okay.
And we'll talk again soon, ma'am. Thanks again for doing this.
Wonderful to meet you, and thank you so much for your interest.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.